Okay, we are going to shift now to the second vision item, which is about the sanctuary remodel proposal. And I'm going to give the floor over to Dave Michaels to kick that off. We have a couple members of our governing board who are going to share different parts of that. And so Dave's going to give a little overview, a little history, some of the scope of what we're thinking in a general cost. Now, we have nothing that we're putting in your hands tonight. This is not the full details. This is not bringing anything to a vote or anything like that, so kind of put that off the side. We want you to understand why we want to bring this forward and just kind of set the stage for us to begin processing this as a church. So, Dave?
Thank you. We know that the time's getting late, but it's like any meeting, we always have the exciting stuffs at the end. So bear with us. But like Pastor Steve said, on to talk about a little bit about the history of it. In the history of the talking about the renovation actually goes back to when Terry Smith and Dwayne was here. And Dwayne's sitting back here in the corner. And Janice and I was trying to think, and we're thinking that was around year 2013 is when we first started talking about this. At that point in time, they were talking about the sanctuary. We were even talking about dreaming big and knocking off the walls and putting another wing on the side here. That's not what we're talking about now, but that's was talked about way back then. We've been talking about this for 4 years now, even when Pastor Steve came. And the building committee at the time, even back then, now recommended that we move forward. It was presented in phases with the nursery and youth room renovations. And as Pastor Steve said, check. Then it went to the foyer renovations. Check. Then it went to outside and the signage and the exterior renovations. Check. What's the fourth one? Where we're sent, the sanctuary. And then, as even Pastor Steve said about last year's annual meeting, he brought it to the floor and even talked about it at that time. So what are we doing? We sense God's movement that now is the time to begin to move forward. We want to start the conversation with you, and we want to be a unified church body if we're going to do this. If you heard this morning's message, and Steve, I'm still on cloud nine, what a message. If you were here, what a message that was preached this morning. I'm going to test you now. Steve had 3 marks of living worthy. Do you remember what they were? That was first, unity. Very good. Very good. That's what we're talking about tonight. If this project is going to go forward, we need to do it as a church body. If it goes forward, then we need everybody working together, whether that's manual labor, whether that's giving, who knows. And in this time of year, we need the boldness. When you hear the cost, you're going to say, oh my goodness. Or you're going to say, why do it now? What did Pastor Steve preach? Why not now? We need to be active now. The work is not done. So what are we talking about? It'd be easier to say, what aren't we talking about? We are talking about the chairs, getting rid of the pews. We're talking about carpet. We're talking about painting. We're talking about reconstruction of the stage, drywalling the ceiling, new lights. And all this will be talked about in detail much later. But that is the scope of what we're talking about doing. And now, I'm sure you have in mind, what are we projecting this cost to be? So right now, we're projecting it to be around $95,000 with all the, most of the work being done by the volunteers. So that's what we're talking about. And I think we'll probably hold off all questions until everyone speaks, and then if you have questions after that. So, back to you, sir.
Thank you, Dave. Yeah, there's a lot to process with all of that, and we look forward to laying all of that out for you in detail at a next meeting, and where we can spend really a dedicated hour to this, where we're not going to take the time to do all of that tonight. Plus, we really want to get a read from you, even just as we initially dip our toe in the water. Is this something we should move forward with? Is there a general sense of excitement and unity in this? So we'll address some of that timing later on. I want to give you 4 compelling reasons why we feel we need to do this project. First of all, our governing board was unanimous on the project that it needs to happen. What we wrestled with was timing, and again, we'll talk about timing in a couple of minutes. But we all agree that this is a project that we need to do as a church, and here are the 4 reasons. The first reason is because the most underutilized square footage in a church building is where there are chairs fixed to the ground. It's wonderful. We have we have wonderful solid seats in here. We go, why would we take these out? Well, so that we can have a multi-purpose type of room. That we can use it for events. We could use it for banquets. We could use it in the youth ministry and in the children's ministry. We could use it for various kinds of ministries in our church. Multi-purpose space that will maximize our building, because as we continue to grow as a church, we need to maximize every square footage of the church. We've been trying to do that over these years, reclaiming spaces that weren't used, and this is one of the ones we want to maximize. A second reason, flexible seating arrangements. If you learned anything from COVID, you realize we need to have flexibility. With seating that is not fixed to the ground, you can space out chairs like we did over there, removing some of the rows and spacing them a little bit further apart. We could have the back rows taken out if we have a smaller group. We could have different aisles that we create. We could do a lot of different things and with a lot of different formats if we had flexible seating arrangements. A third reason, better platform functionality. Dave referenced that we would do some work to remodel the stage. In fact, the proposal is to tear it out completely and rebuild it, very much like it is, but with one solid, one-level surface. And this current stage does not allow for as much flexibility in terms of moving things around, Vacation Bible School, even different arrangements that would be up there. It also does not have a lot of stair access where there's a railing and things like that. Our proposal would be to build stairs all the way across the front, which still allows a place to be able to kneel as an altar, but it also gives a lot of accessibility to our platform. And then there would be even some different configurations on the sides where we would have a great place to put a handrail to be able to get up and down from our platform. So platform functionality. A fourth reason is updating of this space. As you have noticed through the last couple of years, and even dating back before my time when the children's ministry was renovated, we've been trying to update each key area of the church. The children's ministry has gone under renovations, and actually one room is just getting finished up, and the youth ministry, that room is just getting finished up. The adult ministry rooms have all had new paint and new furniture over the last several years. The foyer has been redone. The exterior has been redone. This is the last remaining space that has not had an update in the last couple of decades, in fact. The pews and the chairs, I believe, date back to 1980, if that's correct. Someone could maybe fact check that for me, but we're going 40 years, if give or take, maybe we'll even just call it 30 years. We've had the same configuration and the same carpet and pews, which is wonderful. Think about how much ministry has happened in the last 40 years. Okay? 40 years ago, Bruce and Stephanie Beers weren't even married yet. They've gotten married, and they probably in this sanctuary. Then they've been overseas now for a whole career of missions. That's how long ago we're talking. The Copelands hadn't been sent to Cambodia yet. This sanctuary, by the way, has undergone renovations before 1980. This was the entrance, and that was the platform, and they flipped it completely around and thought out of the box and said, how can we maximize our space? Like, this church has a history of thinking about renovation and thinking about maximizing of the resources God has given us. Think about the generations that have been impacted over these last 40 years, and what if we invest in this, and this is a usable space, quality usable space for more generations to come. Think about 30 years from now, 40 years from now, what may happen as a result of what ministry can take place in this building and in this room. We need to be at a place where we're ready to reach our community and be able to invest. God knows we have a whole new community going in down the road that they need fire trucks for. A new community that we have to reach, that we may see new people coming to join us in our church from there, from all places around our region. This is a place of ministry. We need to steward it well for what God has given us to move forward and to advance as a church. Now the question of timing. I'm going to ask Dave Gustafson to come and address specifically the question, why would we initiate this project while COVID-19 is still going on? We tabled it last year. Why would we bring it to you this year?
Usually like to start off with a joke, but I didn't have one. So we're going to move on and pretend I'm funny. So Pastor Steve and Dave Michaels have already explained the history and the passion, the purpose of the Sanctuary Project. But we wanted to address the possible concerns about the timing, as we've already said. In other words, why now? So this past year has brought more than its share of difficulty and complications. COVID's still a concern right now. We've all dealt with many changes, such as masks, social distancing, and challenges in our jobs and our daily lives. Even now, things are starting to improve, but there's still many unknowns about the future. With so much change and uncertainty, it can feel uncomfortable to move forward with another change that seems like it's optional in some ways, especially in a space like this that is so central to all of us. There's lots of things we like about this sanctuary to make it into an emotional kind of question, emotional kind of decision. And it's easy to become focused on what we're possibly losing instead of focusing on what we're gaining. So we as a board recognize these kind of concerns, and we spent much time discussing this project in all its aspects, but especially its timing. As has been mentioned, the plans for this project go back many years, and as a result, it's been bathed in literal years of prayer. It's been important not to rush the project, but at the same time, we want to balance that with not being afraid to move in God's timing as we sense it. Last year, we talked about moving forward and then put it on pause as COVID basically started right then. But as 2020 drew to a close, we wanted to reevaluate and reopen the conversation. As Steve has mentioned, the support for the project itself has been unanimous. It's just the difficulty and most of the conversation has been sensing and seeking God's timing. So why do we think that now is the right time to start? Pastor Steve talked about this morning to some degree. God is moving. In a lot of ways, it feels like COVID has stopped the world, but it hasn't stopped the world, and it certainly hasn't stopped his work and the need for his work. Even during this frustrating, limiting time, I think most of us can list examples where we've seen God at work in our lives, in our churches around us, affecting lives and advancing his kingdom. As some of you may know, this year the Alliance has begun the plan to relocate the U.S. National Office. So that's a big change for them, and as a result, they've been having some of the similar conversations. Why are we talking about such a big project in such an uncertain time? And to kind of address those concerns, they released this statement. I want to read this one short paragraph from it. While this may seem like a time to pull back because of COVID, economic uncertainty, and increasing political tension, God has actually used these present realities to open doors for the Alliance to achieve greater kingdom effectiveness, and we want to follow his leading in faith. And we think this statement echoes much of the heart of the board and much that we see going on in Emmanuel in a different scale in reference to the sanctuary project. We feel that God is at work in Emmanuel and has bigger plans in the near future, and we want to be prepared for it. In the last 12 years, our church has flexed and stretched and adapted in several ways, and it's been difficult. We don't want to say it hasn't been, but we don't want to miss the ways God has blessed and led the church through it all. Now, some of that we've already talked about tonight, and some of it's written in here that we didn't talk about, Steve referenced. I mean, this report is about the ways God's been working through this church in this year. And I found it encouraging to listen to this because there's so little of this that sounds like it's impacted by COVID. I mean, there's so many things God's been doing and moving in our church. In so many ways, he's blessed our church. I want to highlight a few of these. Some of these aren't in the report, some of them are. Even with this distance, the church has maintained connections. They're not always the ideal connections we want, but we've maintained connection in a lot of ways that other churches have struggled, honestly. Many in the congregation have gone above and beyond to keep the fellowship, to encourage one another, to support each other emotionally, financially, and spiritually in different ways. Emmanuel Church has been growing. As Steve mentioned, we've had new regular attenders. We've had new members join our church, sometimes even when we weren't meeting at all in person. The church's giving has remained strong, including some of our biggest giving in recent history during this time. Many of our regular ministries have had to make changes from Awana to ESL, but God has been faithful through the investment of these leaders and their flexibility, and lives are being impacted. As has been mentioned, is listed here, we've added ministries, we've added staff in this year. I mean, our church has experienced growth despite the difficulties. The heart of the governing board is not to rush any important decisions, but we want to follow what we believe is God's leading and encouragement for us. And we've been seeing a pattern of growth and opportunity despite the uncertainty. I couldn't help but think of a quick parallel that's already been mentioned tonight. Several years ago, seemingly out of the blue, we had the opportunity to purchase the Muma property, the adjacent property. It's something we'd be interested in doing for decades, and we just hadn't had any opportunities. Suddenly we had this opportunity, but it came at a not ideal time. That was the same time that our lead pastor, Terry Smith, was transitioning out of our church to a district position. And I remember the board talking about, why is this the timing? This doesn't seem ideal. Why is God giving us now? Why didn't he give us 2 years ago or 2 years from now? But we had to kind of make that decision then. So we talked about that. It seemed like it's a difficult time to do that. And would the church step up? Would we have the finances? And I remember at least one board member expressing that maybe we were looking at it wrong. Maybe this is a blessing in disguise. Maybe it was an opportunity for the church to rally together and see, look, this is the way that God's moving, even as we have some uncertainty going on right now. This is an opportunity for us to all come together, get excited about, and show our support that God is moving still. And so we moved forward, and in a matter of short weeks, the giving from the congregation showed how eager the church was to support this and invest in God's future for the church. And we were able to collect what was needed for the down payment with extras to spare. At the time, we didn't even know for sure all the uses we had for the property, but because of that faith, we were able, several years later, to offer a parsonage to our youth pastor and his family. So as most of you remember, and as it's been mentioned, before COVID came along, we were already maxing out this space in here. And we're talking about growing, we're talking about ways we can fit the growth the church is providing, the church is dealing with. Including the townhouses down the road. And that's kind of some of the impetus. God is moving. We need to be ready. In some ways, when COVID's over, we want to be ready for the numbers that are coming in here, the opportunities that are going to be waiting, as we're already working on both of those in the meantime. We're not waiting on anything else in the meantime, but We're preparing for that. So kind of in summary, why now? Because we see a pattern of God working in Emmanuel and preparing us for more growth. And we think this project equips us for the opportunities that we think God has in our future.
Thank you, Dave. Appreciate that. Well worded in a way that I don't think I could have spoken any better. We'd like to move now to the financial aspect of the project. And Ryan, where are you at? He's going to be speaking to this. Basically, the question, how do we envision paying for this project? And so he'll come and bring some enlightenment on that.
So yeah, thank you to Dave and Dave for really doing a great job capturing the synopsis of this. Meanwhile, I'm going to try to not bore you as I present a whole bunch of numbers here. So yeah, the price tag was thrown out, $95,000. So where's that coming from? Well, I'm going to try to talk about a couple key numbers. And if you've ever looked closely at a balance sheet at one of these meetings, you've seen these on there. You might not have really known what they are. But the biggest number that matters here is one called the operating fund, which as of the end of January for us was around $172,000. Now what the operating fund includes is all the money we have that is not specifically designated to something. So it does not include things like the benevolent fund, building fund, all those specified funds. It does not include that. Now, one thing it does include is money in our savings account, which I believe, and I think the board is on the same page, in that that is money for emergency use only. We don't want to have to dip into that. So if you take that money out of the equation, basically what we have on hand available to spend for whatever purpose is needed at the end of January was around $118,000. So $95,000 price tag, we have $118,000 on hand. We technically have the money to do this right now. Now the one thing we do need to protect ourselves with is we don't want to just completely wipe that out, because with a large church building, multiple parsonage properties, it doesn't take too many things to happen to really wipe out a chunk of money pretty quick. So we do need to protect some of what's in there for events that may happen, along with the uncertainty with COVID still going on. So we don't want to just spend everything that's in there, but we do have a lot on hand that can go towards this project. Now that all being said, we also have around $10,000 between our building fund and our memorials restricted fund that isn't tied to anything and could be spent for a project like this. So that money could be spent first. What we'd really be looking for, that I think we'd be much more comfortable on the financial side of things, if we were able to raise in funds directly for this project around a quarter of the cost, so we could alleviate some of the hit to that operating fund. That, as we've talked just kind of informally as a board, that would be something that we would really take as confirmation from God. This is a direction that I want you to go as a church. Do we 100% need that? No. And maybe it isn't funds that just come in and are specifically designated to that. Maybe our operating fund just continues to go up and up and up to where we just have the money in there. But seeing something like that would definitely kind of provide us the confirmation that, yeah, the financial resources are here. We're well equipped to be able to do this. But I do want you to understand right now that the money is there, and we don't want to sit on it. We want to use it to better this church so we can better reach the people of this community. Now, just a note of, if this is something you feel really strongly about, how could you give? Honestly, if you just give to the building fund, if this project is ever approved, that's where we would start pulling from. So money given to the building fund is money that potentially down the line goes to helping pay for something like this. I think that's all I really wanted to share.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. Great layout of what we do have and what we're asking for. Now, you may say, well, 25,000, that's not, that's a quarter of the cost. It's not a huge ask because, in the past we've raised more than that. Well, we're not coming to you with a strong, capital campaign that we believe if we had a strong capital campaign, we could pay for the whole thing because God has the resources among our people for that. We're more asking, maybe saving that for a time when we're going to do a building expansion or something like that. We're asking, though, that if the Lord puts it on your heart, begin to give. If there's something special that you feel like you want to really get behind this and suggest something or put a challenge out there, then talk to one of us, and we would be glad to hear from you in that because God can move this and really confirm it. But we're in the stage of starting a conversation, not putting this before congregational vote yet. So we're still, in some ways, dipping our toe in the water, and that feedback from you would be very valuable if you begin to give or if you have some ideas about this and want to step forward with maybe a lead gift or something like that. So we're going to trust the Lord. We're praying for his guidance in that as we go forward. But we do want to protect, in some ways, the resources that we do have so we don't spend it at all. We'll move forward with some final comments about where do we go from here, and then we'll take some Q&A. So the process ahead, where do we go from here? We're starting the conversation tonight. We're asking you to give feedback to us, to talk to anyone who's on our governing board, our elder board, our staff, talk amongst yourselves, be praying, and let us know if you're inside of going, yeah, I think we need to move forward. Yeah, we need to hear from folks who are saying that. If you're in a camp where you're going, well, it sounds good, but I have a lot of questions. Well, ask some questions, and maybe some of those are the ones that are going to be answered at the next meeting. Or if you feel like, no, we really should not, this is not the right time, let us know. We need to kind of get a feel for where you're at. And we're kind of opening the door just informally for that. We do think that we'll probably be moving toward that informational meeting, but if God throws a big stop sign in front of us, we will stop. Even presenting that. But we would invite your feedback. What this would lead to is an informational meeting in about 5 or 6 weeks, perhaps, if the door is open, maybe sometime after Easter, in early or mid-April, to present all of the design ideas, a breakdown of the cost, answer more questions about the process. When would we do this? How would we do this? And do almost like a town hall kind of meeting where we spend a full hour or more on the project. So that would be a second step. And then the third step would be that if we still sense that our congregation has unity, that God is in this, we would move it toward a congregational vote. And you might ask, well, why do we need to have a congregational vote? And here's specifically what our bylaws would require. Not because it's a renovation per se. We're able to do renovations. You didn't vote on the youth room, you didn't vote on the foyer, those kinds of things. But because it is an expenditure that would come out of our operating funds that is above 5% of our budget. And all the other projects we've been able to take from other restricted funds. But this is a project that 5% of our operating fund is about $25,000 or so. We're obviously talking about spending more than that. We would need, in that sense, to have a congregational vote on that specifically. However, our heart is also that vote would be a stamp of confirmation that God is in this and behind this. We're not looking for a 51% majority. We want to have a congregational support behind this and do this with a step of unity. And so that's what's ahead. Step 1 is tonight. Step 2, informational meeting. Step 3, congregational vote. And in the midst of that, we invite your feedback along the way. We would like to enter into the conversation with you. With this, consider yourselves launched into conversation, okay? Consider yourself launched into prayer about this matter. And let's continue to sharpen this, hone this in, think it through, and all of that feedback will make this either confirmed as something God wants us to do, or put up a stop sign, or make us better at thinking through it and make our end result better. So we invite you into that.